Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 2 team selection. We'll be looking at how my team did in Game Week 1, how I feel about my team now. Keep in mind, of course, I have jerked the knees. I have made an early transfer. Some people are upset about it. Some people, I think, are on board with it. And there's always like the sort of mentioning of absolutes in FPL, right? Like, don't make a transfer early. You planned your team for 5 to 6 game weeks, maybe 8 game weeks at a time. What has changed? But ultimately, like, our perceptions can change. And I think that there is a case of, even if you are more, let's say, experienced and you've played multiple years, where you still feel that you can make a move because your perception of things changes very quickly, and you think that after considering the pros and cons of it, you'd still like to make a move. Like last season, I had Kwanzaa, and that seemed like an immediate sell. I think a lot of people sold, but a lot of people equally held. I was very comfortable moving towards a Rico Lewis. In this case here, I'm comfortable making a move. I don't own Kwanzaa, or the equivalent of Kwanzaa. I own a much better player, and I've sold him. But we'll talk about that in a moment. I'd also like to say at this point in time, in terms of transfers, right, just on that topic, you still have the opportunity right now to have a look at getting your team rated by the Fantasy Football Hub AI rating tool. And signing up will actually allow you to get suggested transfers for your specific team to help you continuing to sort of win those mini leagues. And of course, the T's and C's still apply in terms of winning your mini league and getting your money back. There is still an offer in place of 50% off up until the end of the month. So do have a look at that. You'll have access to things like the Opta stats as well, which will update live every single game week and support you in your sort of understanding of, let's say, the macro lens of the game. Before we jump into, let's say, the team selection as well, I'd also like to shout out all the people who have been supporting by providing comments, by liking the videos so far, which if you haven't done, please feel free to do so. At the same time, though, I'd love to see a little bit more people clicking the subscribe button. That would really help support the channel as we try to grow once again at the start of the season and build up that base. So thank you guys so much for supporting, and we'll continue. So let's just quickly jump into Game Week 1, right? Game Week 1, we scored 56 points. I think most managers who didn't, let's say, utilize the bench boost probably had a score similar to myself. I know there's a lot of people who've done much better. I've even seen someone with a bench boost one, a friend of mine actually, who I think got 125 points with triple Leeds defense, some other sort of monstrosities like, well, not even monstrosities, but just how amazing it is, right? Triple Liverpool offense, things like that. So I did a pretty meager 56 points. Sanchez ultimately ended up getting 1+ bonus, so that was nice. The Spurs defense did the job. Murillo not quite so much. I was quite upset about Thiago getting a penalty, to be honest. But hey, it's what can you do? In the midfield, I did go with Sarr and Jorginho. These were picks that I still like today. One of them is no longer my team, and we'll talk about that right now. Bruno was close to DEFCON points in a tough game, so I quite liked it. And he actually had some really good chances anyways within open play. But more so within the set pieces, right? You can now start to see that. I think we can expect Bruno to produce quite a fair bit this season, because it's just so clearly abundant that, you know, that Mbumo, that these are, or Ahmad, you know, being a supportive piece, for example, behind, let's say, Mbumo, is so much of a radical change compared to what Bruno had to work with in the past. And so looking forward, right, to a Bruno season at this point in time, plus the DEFCONs as a bit of a baseline sometimes, right? We were close, not close enough. With Salah, the captaincy, I think, went well. Like in the context of, you know, what kind of drafts were available to people, I think, yes, of course, Salah, for example, actually performed well. Like Haaland, of course, smashed Salah, but then there's a lot of people who went for nomium drafts too that are clearly going to feel a little bit bad about this game week, coming off with a Palmer captaincy, for example, and it not going so swell. So I do feel quite fortunate in this aspect. Still happy to own Salah, and as I said in some of my previous videos, especially my preview video, which I uploaded earlier this week, it's still totally fine to be patient about Salah. You have, let's say, Liverpool fixtures that are amazing in Game Week 4. And not only that, but in Game Week 5, when you've got Everton at home and Everton don't look particularly good right now, I mean, that's a huge gap and swing between the Haaland versus Salah captaincy. And then it swings the other way around in Game Week 6. Why not just wait until then and then reassess? So I can't see myself really moving on to the premiums. And on the case of, let's say, owning Salah plus Haaland, similar case here where I'm still happy with players like Palmer. As much of an error it could be, let's just see a few weeks of Chelsea good fixtures and then reassess, right? I still have, let's say, Palmer versus Brentford that I kind of want to see through, and then maybe I can change my mind on a Game Week 5, for example. But that's not a great Haaland week anyways. That's Arsenal. So similar to sort of that context of not wanting to touch Salah, I don't see myself moving off of Palmer up until Game Week 6, and that's kind of where I'm at. And the same, and especially because if I don't move towards someone like Saka this week on Game Week 2 when he's got Leeds at home, I don't see myself moving towards a like for like from that Palmer position. I don't own Wirtz, but I still think he's a strong pick, so I won't really need to discuss Wirtz. But Sarr, that's his worst game of this sort of fixture calendar at the start. gone now, and just generally looking more confident towards some better fixtures ahead for Sar. In the forward line, we've got Watkins and Strand Larson. I think there was a lot of discussion about the budget forwards before the game week had started, and ultimately I think a lot of people actually came off of that week with a lot more confidence around Jorgen Strand Larson as a pick. I've always said that I think he's on penalties. I'm not sure if that's going to be the case, but I do think he's the main man of the team. Arias didn't even start the game, which I think is a positive in terms of how you want to sort of, I don't know, equivalent importance within the squad, etc. But yeah, he had a good performance versus Man City. Actually got a couple of shots off, which is impressive considering you're not expecting too much versus City. And the big question always around Strand Larson is how this team is going to do without Cunha. I think for the most part, they'll still be fine. When I look at the sort of projected goals from Strand Larson in the market, I think I'm quite confident about that. With Watkins, they were pretty appalling versus Newcastle, but I wouldn't be worried. I generally think that Watkins is a pick that I won't touch in my team up until game week 7. And all this to say that I'm quite happy with my team as it stands, right? I still like Anderson. I still like Estev for game week 2 only in game week 2. We'll talk about Sanchez versus Dubravka, which is an interesting decision and a 50-50 for this game week. But for the most part, I don't think we can come towards game week 1 being 100% certain about the draft. Like the draft that I come up to game week 1 with is something that I'm happy with, that I've sort of considered the pros and cons of. But your ability to sort of change your mind, I think, is fluid. Is it necessary to sort of extremely harshly react to one game week? No. And does it look like I've knee-jerked? Absolutely. But I also think that I'm willing to say that Jorginho for me is still a good pick. When I look at the markets, his sort of projected goals hasn't dropped. But Tihiani on the other side was actually someone who sort of exploded, right? And that kind of gave me the confidence to move towards Tihiani as a pick. And it does give me a 0.5 cost saving. And 0.5 can go a long way in terms of future transfers. Yes, I maybe lose a little bit of flexibility, definitely, within 2 free transfers in game week 3 or 3 transfers in game week 4. But I think equally 0.5 can make you very malleable to, let's say, if I'm super confident, for example, that Munoz is the right pick to have in game week 4, something like Romero to Munoz is on the cards for me. If I'm super confident, for example, in Estev to Dorgu in game week 3, that is on the cards for me as well. So I think that flexibility is nice. And as you begin to see with the price rises and falls, you're almost blocked from an entire position if you don't have that 0.5 sometimes, right? For example, Semenyo is now almost arguably a 7.5 pick because someone can't move a 7.0 player like Rodgers to Semenyo at this point in time. So I do think that that is worth mentioning. So that's why I made the Jorginho to Reinders move. And part of it too is sort of pricing in these 2 price rises. Some managers don't really like chasing price rises. I think some of them see absolutely no relevance to them whatsoever. I'm sure, for example, I have a good example actually with a friend who did finish within the top 200 and had, all the Nkunku and Kwanzaa price drops from last season. But equally, I think the long-term argument is, in most average cases, if you can accumulate more team value, that should be better and more beneficial for your future wildcards, for your future team. So I'm willing to make this move, right? I'm basically saying that I'm confident in Reinders' minutes. I think he's probably an equivalent pick to Jorginho. Have I pulled the trigger quite early? Yes, but I'm comfortable doing it. And, if it goes wrong, that's fine. If Jorginho scores a brace, I'll have to take it on the chin. It's not the first time I've lost a lot of points by making a transfer. So that's my team for game week 1. And as you guys know, of course, I've made the transfer of Jorginho to Reinders. I've kind of explained the move as well. But one graphic that I think is crucial to sort of also explaining exactly how interesting Reinders is to me from an objective point of view is this graphic here from my friend FPL GW2. This is the sheet showing the movement in terms of the projected assists odds within the Premier League and also the projected goals odds. So you can see the biggest mover on both goals and assists after the weekend, and also just in general from that sort of 2-week path before, let's say, the season had started, was Reinders. And so that to me is not saying that the markets have underestimated how good Reinders is as a player in terms of his ability to get goals and assists. That to me is actually the market's reflection of actually what Reinders' future minutes will be and potentially what his short-term minutes will be as well in the season, where I think the implication here is if he gets good minutes under this Pep team, under Man City, he's going to get a lot more returns than we thought, as opposed to, suddenly we're aware of Reinders now because he scored 1 goal and 1 assist. Of course, the markets are also taking into account that he has scored 1 goal and 1 assist. So that movement of 6.5 to 8.5 goals is actually the market suggesting that he'll score 1 more goal compared to, let's say, the previous expectation potentially. And then equally with the assist piece, it's almost that additional 0.88 worth of assists now being priced into Reinders. And so that's, for me, an objective view at how good he can be as a pick. And I'm willing to sort of buy into that confidence myself, right? I also watched the match, rewatched the highlights as well. Like and a lot of people sort of react to, let's say, the 0.34 XGI. I'm not someone who really cares about the 1 game XGI sample. It's just about really the chances, the opportunities, what I saw on the pitch, and my sort of future inference of, let's say, what his minutes will be under like with Pep. And then the next argument I think is going to be about what people want to say in terms of, let's say, the goals, right? I appreciate that this is not a team selection video for me to just explain one move. But it's still about this sort of overall confidence within this Man City team as a goal scoring team. And I think actually when you look at the fixtures, it's really only Game Week 5 that sticks out as being a poor game. So this graphic here is produced by the 11fi.com model. He's got a team strength model. And so you can still see that City is still very, very much high up in terms of the team goal share, higher than Liverpool, higher than Arsenal. No surprise with Arsenal, of course, they have some really tough games here, but with Liverpool, they also have some pretty tough mirrors. But some nice games in Game Week 4 and 5 that we're aware of. I'm just saying here with the Man City, I feel generally quite confident about their games. And that's kind of where we're at right now. So yeah, I've made that Reinders move and I'm happy with that. So let's move on quickly towards the team selection for this game week. But before that, let's just have a look at the specific data preview for this week, right? So what we have here is 11fi's data preview for match day 2. It's effectively a reflection of, let's say, the accumulated odds for this game week specifically. So what are the nice things to call out for? What are the teams to target? What are the interesting things that I'd like to point out, right? So this is a model, of course. So this would have adjusted already to, let's say, the game week 1, I suppose, noise, if you want to put it like that. But of course, the model is underpinned by seasons and seasons of underlying data. What I think is worth calling out here is Arsenal still absolutely top for many, many metrics here, right? They have a really good game, but interestingly, City above in terms of projected goals, which I'm sure some people might intuitively think they can't sit with that. It's Tottenham at home. Tottenham play a back 3, but it also shows you that it's also worth recognizing that we shouldn't overreact to how good a team can get under a new manager, under some changes, right? Like the Tottenham team, even though they'll set up once again completely differently, they did still concede a lot of chances to Burnley. I think even more so than we probably expected within that sort of match. So it's just a reflection also possibly of how well City performed in that first game, and that maybe having some minor impacts in terms of the projections, plus the sort of home and away aspect. So City top, which I think is quite surprising in terms of goals, but then Arsenal sort of leading across both metrics and very, very high up in terms of clean sheets. Here you can kind of see that City aren't expected to keep it clean, for example, versus Spurs. However, there are generally some pretty good clean sheet odds on offer this week. And on the 50-50, right, which is a lot of people dealing with Dubravka and Sanchez as their goalkeepers. Interestingly, 11fi's model still has Burnley at 35%, and I think Sanchez and Chelsea, of course, at 32%. I think from what I've seen from the markets, I think Chelsea's actually maybe up 1 or 2%, but this is normal, right? When you have different models and they can compete with each other in terms of the kind of outputs, there's going to be some differences. But all that tells me is that it is basically a 50-50. Choose what you want to do, right? If you own a Stev, you're playing a Stev, do you want to back double Burnley defense? It could work out in your favor, right? Because if you get the double clean sheet, you kind of gamble on that stack can be really, really beneficial. At the same time, if you're not so confident in Burnley and you kind of want to, I guess, diversify with your approach, then they have the opportunity to simply play Sanchez. And if we wanted to be really harsh in terms of reacting to the one game sample, I think I'd be pretty high on, let's say, hoping that West Ham continue to look like a really, really poor offense. And then I'd probably go with Sanchez. That's my view, right? But all this is saying here is that it's a close decision. Otherwise, I think you actually have some very, very mixed games here across the board. Like you can see that even in terms of like the expected win rates, it's quite close. A lot of these games look like both teams to score type games. No excessively high clean sheets outside of Arsenal. So that's kind of what we can expect for this week. Like even some really strong defenses, like maybe a Nottingham Forest, they're expected to be put under a lot of pressure versus Crystal Palace. A team like Aston Villa, for example, interestingly was not with great numbers versus Brentford, but I would expect that to be a good game. Like maybe are we thinking that Brentford are going to be as bad as they were in Game Week 1? Because if so, then we'd probably be a little bit higher on Aston Villa, right? But those are the kind of things that I think you can kind of look at, but just worth sort of looking at, once again, another sort of objective approach in terms of the numbers for this week. Otherwise, I think the bit of a long-term change is this is a great fixture point to jump into Crystal Palace, to jump into Bournemouth, but I equally understand a lot of people wanting to roll, wanting to assess a little bit better. But all I'm saying is that this is a great landing spot for those teams because they've come off of games like Liverpool away and Chelsea away, and their fixture run really just starts now. So yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of the data preview. Now let's jump into my team selection here. The team selection is pretty standard, as you can imagine, given that I've already made a transfer. So it's pretty obvious to see like what my team will look like. But I am planning very much so to rotate the defense a lot. I'm playing Sanchez over Dubravka. As I said, I think it's a true 50-50. Choose what you want to choose. Part of it, I guess, is I don't really want to go double Burnley defense and cry if Sanchez gets a clean sheet. He's got pretty high effective ownership. And I just think Chelsea are a bit better at this moment in time. So yeah, that's why I have Sanchez. As far as Anderson, Esteve, Murillo, I think a lot of people are going to see Pedro Porro being benched and immediately say that this makes absolutely no sense. I'm still happy to bench the more offensive player here. I just think that the City offense is, I'm pretty confident in it, right? So I'm basically thinking that I'm going to lose a clean sheet with Pedro Porro, potentially even get in minus points from the goals conceded. And that's kind of why I've moved towards an Anderson. Either way, I think I'm basically putting an attacker versus a defender here. It's either Pedro Porro versus, let's say, a Reinders, for example, or an Anderson versus a Bruno. I can't really win, I suppose, either way, unless, let's say, the attacker scores. But I just think you've got good chances, for example, with Anderson to get things like DEFCON points, and that's something that is quite salvageable. So can Porro, of course, but just in terms of like the season-long averages, like I'd probably back Anderson a little bit more. And equally, City actually control so much of the ball that they don't really give the opposing team too many defensive contributions. So that's something that I wanted to mention. So that's why I'm playing Anderson. Esteve, for me, is just your very, very boring C-bit play here with really good clean sheet odds within the context of the week. So I'm playing Esteve versus Sunderland at home. Interestingly, a lot of people probably would have reacted to that Sunderland versus West Ham game. And I think a lot of people are already, willing to, let's say, be extremely high on Leeds, be extremely high on Sunderland. I still think it's worth being a bit patient. Leeds, potentially within the defensive aspect of things, I think you can probably feel quite confident in. They also accumulated a lot of expected goals and just general chance creation versus Everton. But if you take away that penalty, for example, it's not like it was exhilarating, right? And the same thing with Sunderland too. When you actually look at the actual chances they created in terms of quality, it wasn't actually that high in terms of the XG. So do I think that there's a need for it to suddenly overcorrect and think that Burnley losing 3-0 versus Tottenham suddenly means that they're not going to be able to get a clean for the rest of the season? No, but I'm just saying I'll still take my chances here with a reasonably good game with Esteve, especially since he's playing at home. With Murillo, it's probably a case of, once again, praying for DEFCONs. I'm not expecting a lot here. He's also another player here who faces off against one of my attackers. It's a case of probably trying to come out of the game with the most amount of points possible, even from a floor perspective. So that's why we've gone with Murillo and Anderson over, let's say, a Pedro Porro. But I can understand a lot of people like to play the attacker here, and feel free to do so. But in terms of, let's say, balancing the expected clean sheet and the DEFCON potential versus Porro versus Man City and the negative potential there, I've kind of gone with these players. In the midfield, though, it's pretty standard. It's Salah, it's Sarr, it's Palmer, it's Bruno, and it's Reinders, right? A new addition to the team. So, yes, I'm ready to take the what if Rutter scores a brace post. But generally, I think I'd like to say, when you feel comfortable in FPL in terms of making picks and sort of making judgments, it doesn't mean that your FPL team is a reflection of, like, these are the only 15 players in the game that I actually think will do well. Like, I still think Rutter is a good pick. The reason why I've sold him is because I think I've literally bought an equivalent pick for 0.5 less. And I could end up being very wrong, but that's just my take. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it's objectively better than other people's takes or opinions. And so that's why I have Reinders. And as far as, let's say, the captaincy, I think that's the most interesting segment, potentially. But we'll go to the forwards first and just quickly unveil that I'll be playing Watkins and Strand Larson. I plan to put Mark Yu actually as first bench. So that means Porro and Romero sit right behind him. It does feel bad to have Dubravka on the bench, but I think it's so close that I won't really mind either way. And I suppose, fortunately, too, I don't have, let's say, this goalkeeper facing up versus another potential attacker. Otherwise, that would probably also drive an element to my decision-making. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. Captaincy, though, I've seen some people mention Watkins because obviously there was a bit of a harsh reaction towards Brentford's performance in Gameweek 1. But that's still an away match, and he's still probably worse, generally speaking, than, let's say, a Palmer and a Salah. I tend to think Palmer has the best game here. Salah clearly is the best player. And then Watkins is a bit of a mix, I suppose, in terms of people probably being allergic to captaining Palmer after a long extended run of non-performance. But here in this case, I think I'm still going to back Salah. Last season, I had probably gone against Salah as soon as I thought there were close captaincies. It didn't go well for me, but I don't think that was a learning point necessarily. Like, I would take those risks again. I think it's a close situation once again this season. But my concern once again with Palmer is that sort of positional piece of, is Enzo Maresca really utilizing the best of him? Are we going to see that sort of Club World Cup setup of Reece James a little bit more interior and then Kukurea playing a bit deeper, then thus allowing Gusto to almost hold a bit more of advanced fullback position, and then Palmer playing the right half space? That doesn't seem like what Enzo wants to do. Potentially it's just protecting, let's say, Reece James over the course of the season and actually utilizing that for some tougher matches, which this game on paper isn't. Although I think if you're going to respect Crystal Palace, which we all should, that's probably the setup that he would have opted for, but he didn't go for that. Equally, Salah's just Salah, and I feel a little bit cautious right now, right? At the start of the season, I don't want to do anything too exceptionally crazy. Part of the reason why I've gone for a Salah draft, because I think I always planned for this to be a potential Salah captaincy, whilst knowing Palmer could be an interesting option if he showed any sort of signs of life in game week 1. Maybe I'm also overreacting to Salah just still inevitably getting a goal in the like final minute of a football match, and that might be driving my decision making, especially as Chelsea just have a simply better game. But yeah, that's kind of what's making it tough. Do I think there's potential for me to sit on the deadline and have reignited confidence for Palmer and go for a Palmer captaincy? Absolutely. I'm not going to tell anyone here, though, that there's a standout captaincy. I think I'd probably choose Salah, and I think if you're being a bit more cautious, I would choose Salah as well between the two. Now, other people have Saka and they have Haaland. The news that we actually got from FPL Kala was that apparently Saka is going to give penalties to Gyökeres, and we also got even more fundamental news in that Havertz is now out with a knee injury for an extended amount of time, which then kind of calls into question, you know, whether Gyökeres is going to play more minutes and then reduce the sort of penalty share of Saka by that nature. I think that my captaincy list, without sort of looking at my own team, would probably be actually Haaland first, then Saka, then probably Gyökeres, because I'm expecting much more minutes from him versus Leeds, and the fixture is just there. Then I'd have Salah, then I'd have Palmer. But I think it's very close between all of the picks. I do think Haaland is probably a standout alongside Saka. Those are the two picks that I like the most, but I don't own them in my team. So the decision that I have to make is just Salah versus Palmer. I'm cautious for now, but I can say definitely by the time I get to that deadline stream, I can definitely be on a Palmer draft. So that's going to be it for my team selection. Thank you guys so much for watching. As I said, you can have a look at getting your team rated right now by Fantasy Football Hub. You can also get suggested transfers if you want for Game Week 2. It might even suggest you to do no transfers, but it will give you a bit of a path and a way forward in terms of how to manipulate your team going forwards and what other things you can be looking at that you might not be aware of right now to sort of maximize your points in the future. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Goodbye. And I'll see you guys on that deadline stream.